They stood in the living room like judges. My in-laws. Their faces were cold and hard. "You trapped our son," Mr. Alvarez said, as if the words could pin me to the floor. Mrs. Alvarez folded her arms and glared like thunder. I held the divorce papers in my hand. My thumb felt the corner of the paper like a heartbeat. "You signed them?" she asked, voice small and venomous. I had. I signed them after nights of quiet anger, after promises broken. So many times they were empty shells. I had signed them for my safety, for my self-respect. I couldn't breathe. Their son, Mateo, stood behind them, eyes down. He looked sick and trapped between us like a bird in a glass box. "She made him do it," Mrs. Alvarez whispered. I looked at Mateo. His jaw trembled. He didn't defend me. He didn't look at me. My heart punched my ribs. The room hummed. My own mother would have called me brave. Here, bravery was a crime. They called me a liar, a manipulator, a snare. The divorce papers hummed in my hands. The injustice burned, and something inside me steadied. I would not be small. When I met Mateo, he was different. He laughed like sunlight and had a way of holding my hand that made everything else quiet. We were young when we married, barely adults with too many dreams and not enough money. He was tender at first, full of apology and late-night fixes. I thought we could grow through the hard hours. Instead, the hard hours multiplied. His parents visited often, with advice wrapped like knives. They interfered gently at first, buying things we hadn't asked for, commenting on our bills, offering help, and then reminding us of repayment. They told him I was too proud, too stubborn, too independent. Little cracks in our life widened. Mateo started disappearing for work at odd times. He came home quieter. Once, he left me on a bench at midnight and drove away without a word. I learned later that he had been at his parents' house, listening to them tell him I was wrong. I forgave and tried to build bridges. But every bridge I built, their words shook apart. I began to feel like I was walking on thin ice. The divorce felt impossible and necessary. The day I signed the papers, Mateo and I had finally argued so hard that our voices sounded like two storms. He said he needed a break. I said I needed the truth. He said he wasn't happy. I said neither was I. We both said things that hurt. After he left, I sat in silence and counted every bruise on my trust. I called a lawyer that night, hands trembling, and she talked me through the steps like a map. She said safety first, finance a second, dignity always. I collected passwords, bank statements, photos, evidence of what we had been. I wanted to protect my future. I filed, and the papers were served. The next morning, Mateo's parents came like vultures. They wanted explanations and apologies, and when they saw the papers, they called me viper and thief. "You trapped our son," Mr. Alvarez said again, louder now. He said it like a verdict. I explained the nights and the quiet threats and the way Mateo had drifted. They narrowed their eyes and refused to listen. Mateo stood between us, mouth closed. His silence felt like an accusation. The lawyer's words echoed, "Protect yourself." I tucked the papers away like armor. After the confrontation, our neighborhood buzzed. People liked neat stories, heroes and villains. My phone rang with whispers. Some neighbors assumed I had been cruel. Others sent gentle texts of concern. I learned quickly how words could twist. Mr. Alvarez spoke to anyone who would listen, telling them I had forced his son into divorce. He made the story about me like a play he directed. My inbox is filled with cold messages. Mateo began to avoid me more. He stopped answering my calls, answering only because his mother hovered, needing updates for dramatic effect. I tried to talk to him. He said things like, "This isn't what I wanted," which I could not untangle from the push and pull of family pressure. I kept remembering the first happy days, the small red scarf he knitted for me, the way his hand fit mine. The contrast made the wound sharper. I started keeping a notebook of moments, small proofs of love and pain, so I wouldn't lose the truth. I also started noticing small signs of a plan forming in me, a plan to show the world what had really happened, but not in a way that hurt them cruelly. I wanted justice and mercy both. A twist came from an old friend, Eliza, who ran a neighborhood cafe. She slipped a key under my door one afternoon with a note. "Use this if you need to get out." Her kindness made me cry alone in my kitchen. She didn't judge. She simply offered a way forward. I used that key the night the Alvarez family came over unannounced, demanding answers. Mateo wasn't home. I kept quiet and watched them through the window as they paced, plotting. They believed I was panicking. Little did they know I had already made arrangements to move out if needed. I packed boxes slowly, deliberately, like a person learning to let go. Every dish I wrapped felt like a small victory. The Alvarez family complained loudly. Neighbors watched. Through the window, I saw them conspire to make Mateo feel ashamed of his choices. They told him he was failing by choosing himself. They framed my leaving as a trap when in truth I left to save my life. I imagined the papers in their frantic hands, flipping like angry birds. The next morning, Mateo found a note from me. I can't live this half-life. I'm leaving for a while to think. When Mateo read the note, he was shocked. He rushed to my door like a man running late to a funeral. He begged, then cried, then asked me to stay. For a moment, I nearly did. The pull between us was a physical force. But then his mother called, louder than his plea, telling him to remember duty and family name. He faltered. He walked away and left me on my porch, the note clutched to my chest like a small shield. That night, he slept at his parents' house. I felt like I had been left on the roadside, carrying a suitcase of broken promises. I started to document everything carefully, messages, timestamps, the dates Mateo stayed away. The lawyer told me to be meticulous. Evidence, she said, becomes truth in a courtroom where gossip fails. I gathered emails and photos and planned a safe move. As I boxed up my life, I found a letter Mateo had once written to me about running away together to build a tiny home by the sea. My heart ached. The revelation that his parents had read that letter and decided I was a threat made me angrier. I now had fuel to show who had interfered and why. But the next day, a neighbor called with news that would change odds. The neighbor's voice was urgent. "They're meeting about you tonight," she whispered. I felt cold. A meeting, a trap, an attack on my name. They had gathered at the community hall to discuss how to handle the divorce and protect their son. I could hear their plans in the neighbor's breath. They wanted to spread rumors, to cut me off from friends, to keep Mateo under their thumb. I decided to attend. I dressed in plain clothes and walked in like a shadow. The room smelled of coffee and righteous fury. Mr. Alvarez presented a stack of printed texts and selective quotes like trophies. He aimed to show I had manipulated Mateo. I listened to him twist words. At one point, he said I had encouraged Mateo to leave his family for me. A woman in the back nodded solemnly. I felt my heart hammer. Then, suddenly, Mateo stood up. He asked for permission to speak. His voice shook, but he was there. He said things that both threatened and freed me, things that surprised everyone. He admitted he had been unhappy before me, that his parents had helped shape his pain, and then he stopped, eyes wild. His next words would be the room's pivot. Mateo's confession hung in the air like heat. He had the courage to admit pain, but then he faltered, saying that my leaving spurred him to face his parents. He told the room that their control had been a cage. The Alvarez family reacted with denial, gaslighting in full swing. Mrs. Alvarez cried loudly, as if sorrow could rewrite the truth. I felt hope flicker. But the twist came when Mateo's father slammed his fist on the table and accused me of forging messages to spite them. He produced a printout of texts that made me look cold and cruel. I had never written those words. I had no proof yet to show they were doctored. The room gasped. My hands went numb. Lies had turned into armor for them. Mateo looked crushed, caught between loyalty and truth. I realized the only way forward was to show my side clearly and calmly. I asked Mateo to let me present evidence quietly, not in the hall but somewhere neutral. He hesitated. He agreed to meet me later at the park. The Alvarez family left in mutters of manipulation and shame. The weight of the false texts rested in my throat. I needed proof, and fast. At the park, Mateo sat on a bench, eyes swollen, hands in his pockets. He handed me his phone with trembling fingers and said, "I don't know which truth to trust." I felt sick with love and betrayal at the same time. I took the phone and scrolled through messages that had been twisted into a story I didn't recognize. Then I asked him to show me his backups, the cloud backups where messages lived. He hesitated. His parents often controlled those accounts. He admitted he had used the family cloud for storage because he thought it would make his parents happy. That was their grip. I suggested we get a forensic download from the phone company, but he worried about the cost and the fallout. I proposed we take screenshots, timestamps, and print metadata. We began to gather anything that showed original times and sources. While we worked, he told me about a night when his father had spoken to him for hours about duty and sacrifice and used money as a leash. I felt anger, but the plan kept me steady. We agreed to meet the next day with a tech-savvy friend, Luis, who owed me a favor. If we could show the altered texts were fake, the Alvarez narrative would crack. The park bench felt like an island of truth. Luis arrived like a calm storm. He loved puzzles and had an easy way with phones. He took Mateo's phone, plugged it into his laptop, and his fingers flew. I watched the screen as hex codes and metadata scrolled by like a secret language. He frowned, then smiled. These texts were exported and edited, he said. Look, timestamps mismatch. The metadata shows manual changes. My chest is unclenched. Proof was like sunlight. We printed reports that evening, organized timelines, and labeled evidence. I felt powerful, not in a cruel way, but like a person reclaiming their story. Mateo looked relieved but terrified of his parents' reaction. I asked him if he was ready to stand against them. He promised to try. We decided to present the evidence calmly to anyone who would listen. Neighbors, the local community board, even the small paper that covered neighborhood disputes. The next morning, as we prepared our case, a new twist arrived. Mr. Alvarez filed a temporary restraining order claiming I was harassing the family and their son. The court papers arrived like a slap. The judge ordered limited contact until the hearing. Mateo panicked, saying he couldn't talk to me freely. I felt blindsided. The law, they had found, could be used to freeze me out. The restraining order felt like a jail sentence. I could not approach their house, call their landline, or send messages. My lawyer said it was temporary, but the damage was real. I had a plan differently. I used intermediaries, Eliza, Luis, and a community counselor named Ariel, to pass messages to Mateo. They warned me to stay calm. If I reacted angrily, it would play into Mr. Alvarez's narrative. I kept my voice steady as I spoke to my lawyer and compiled more evidence. Meanwhile, rumors grew colder, like frost. People began whispering that I had forced Mateo's hand. The press of shame felt thick. I started writing a diary of everything, in case memories proved necessary later. The twist came in a small envelope left at my door. A photo of Mateo as a child, with his parents behind him like shadows. On the back, someone had written, "We raise our own." It felt like a threat. Who wanted to frighten me? The Alvarez family's reach was longer than I thought. I had to step smarter. I filed a counter motion for temporary custody of our joint accounts and for fair mediation. The courtroom would be the battlefield, but first we needed a plan that would make the truth visible, undeniable. Courtrooms smell like paper and old power. I sat in the waiting room, hands folded, heart like a trapped bird. Mateo was not allowed inside initially because of the order. When he finally sat beside me, he looked thin and tired. He whispered that his parents had hired a counselor to influence him. They wanted to rewrite his memories. I felt rage, but also a soft grief. We gave our statements. I presented Luis's forensic report. The judge listened like a slow river. The Alvarez family produced their edited printouts and a testimony from a housekeeper who claimed I had been secretive. The judge sighed and ordered a temporary joint mediation. No final words. But the clerk handed me a document. Mr. Alvarez had filed for full guardianship over Mateo's financial decisions, claiming incapacity caused by stress. That move shook me. It was a power grab disguised as care. I realized how badly they wanted control. The hearing closed with a promise to look at the metadata and call tech experts. As we left the courthouse, a camera from a local news site snapped our faces. The story had reached a wider audience. Exposure could help or harm us. I needed to be careful, to use the light to reveal the truth, not to feed gossip. Mateo squeezed my hand and whispered, "I'm sorry." I whispered back, "We'll fix this." The media attention brought strange supporters and harsher critics. An online thread painted me as manipulative. Another praised my courage. I used social platforms to share a calm timeline of events, dates, messages, verified tech reports, without angry words. People responded with curiosity and some with empathy. A local journalist named Priya reached out, wanting to hear my story. She was fair, asking precise questions, not sensational ones. I told her about our early love, the slow tightening of his parents' control, and the falsified messages. She asked for documents, and I gave them. She promised to verify before publishing. Meanwhile, Mr. Alvarez gave an interview claiming I had entrapped his son in a campaign of emotional abuse. The twist came when Priya called me the next morning. She had interviewed the housekeeper again and found inconsistencies. The housekeeper had been coached. Priya's piece would focus on manipulation by external actors. It would show the technical proof too. The article ran, and the tide shifted slightly. People began to question the Alvarez narrative. Yet not everyone believed. Some defended the family out of loyalty or habit. Mateo's silence grew shorter, and he started to visit me in secret. Each visit was a fragile stitch. We both knew the hearing would be the real test. The mediation day arrived. The room felt small, tension heavy as a blanket. The mediator was a woman with steady eyes who asked blunt questions. Mr. Alvarez sat rigid, words practiced. Mrs. Alvarez cried on cue. Mateo answered softly, torn. I sat there with my folder of evidence. I watched their faces when I presented the forensic report showing edits and the cloud logs showing different upload times. Mr. Alvarez's jaw clenched. He denied technical facts until the mediator called a tech expert via video call. The expert confirmed the edits. The Alvarez defense frayed. Then the twist. Mrs. Alvarez produced a private letter from Mateo accusing me of abandonment years ago. The letter seemed real. My throat tightened. I knew nothing of it. Mateo claimed he had written it in anger once, but in the record it was time-stamped to a time when he had been with me. The mediator paused. We all felt the ground tilt. The letter complicated everything, suggesting a history I didn't remember. I asked for handwriting analysis. Mateo looked confused and then scared. Did someone forge more than texts? The mediation ended without resolution. The next step was a full evidentiary hearing. We prepared like soldiers. We hired a handwriting analyst and a private investigator. The investigator traced the letter's origin to a printer at the Alvarez family home. The handwriting, however, was inconclusive at first glance. The analyst found oddities, pressure patterns that matched Mateo's youth notes but not recent script. The plot thickened. Someone had taken Mateo's old words and printed them as current. That suggested premeditation. Mateo's face went pale. He whispered that his father had access to his childhood diaries and had once used them to coach him. The investigator also found that certain texts had been exported from a family computer, not Mateo's phone. A new twist, the Alvarez family had created a pattern of building evidence to maintain control. We gathered these findings and presented them to the lawyer. Meanwhile, my small circle, Eliza, Luis, and Ariel, grew like a net of safety. Word spread quietly in the neighborhood. Perhaps the truth was more complex. The judge agreed to subpoena the Alvarez home computer for forensic analysis. When the subpoena was served, Mr. Alvarez reacted like someone caught in a net. He threatened countersuits. The family claimed persecution. I felt fear creep back. They were ruthless. But the net was closing, and I had a strange calm. Justice felt like patient work. The forensic exam of the Alvarez computer took longer than expected. We waited like patients in a hospital, breath held. Finally, the tech report arrived. Multiple documents had been manipulated and printed through the family printer. The metadata showed dates and users. The pattern was clear. Someone at the house had been creating false evidence. The judge called an emergency hearing to review the findings. Mr. Alvarez turned pale in court. He denied everything, but the report was thorough. The twist came when the housekeeper admitted she had been asked to copy messages and letters at the family's request. She testified that Mr. Alvarez had requested certain materials to protect his son. Her words sounded like surrender. The Alvarez lawyers scrambled, suggesting coercion and that she had been forced to lie. The courtroom buzzed. Mateo sat beside me, chin lifted for the first time in months. He touched my hand under the table. The judge, after reviewing evidence and credibility, lifted the temporary restraining order and ordered counseling and supervised family meetings so we could rebuild communication safely. The ruling felt like a small victory. But Mr. Alvarez still leaned on power. He filed for a defamation countersuit. The legal fight continued, but the narrative had shifted. People began to see cracks in the image the Alvarez family had shown for so long. After the court's decision, Mateo and I began therapy together. The sessions were awkward, like learning to walk after falling. Mateo opened up slowly. He revealed that his parents had always been overbearing, steering his choices from school to job. Their approval had been currency. He admitted he had been ashamed of choosing his own path. He had been afraid of their anger, and that fear had cost us months of silence. The twist arrived when Mateo confessed he had secretly recorded a conversation with his father where Mr. Alvarez admitted to creating fake evidence to control him. Mateo had hidden the recording out of fear. He played it in therapy with trembling hands. The room went quiet. Our counselor advised caution and legal use of the recording. It was damning. Mr. Alvarez speaking calmly about shaping the narrative about protecting family honor. The recording became crucial evidence. We shared it with my attorney. The Alvarez camp accused us of entrapment. Media interest spiked again. The recording showed the father's real voice, though. This time, the public could hear his plan. The community's sympathy grew. Mateo felt both relief and shame. I felt relief too, but also sorrow for the father he once admired. Truth was messy, and we were learning that exposing it would hurt some and heal others. With the recording in hand, our case strengthened. The judge allowed it as evidence. The Alvarez team reacted violently, trying to discredit Mateo's character, claiming he was unstable. But the audio was clear and the timing matched other evidence. The public began to see the pattern. Control disguised as care. A twist came unexpectedly. Mr. Alvarez's business partner, a man named Carlos, contacted me privately. He confessed that he had known about the family's manipulations and wanted out. He offered documents showing payments and memos where Mr. Alvarez discussed reputation management. Carlos feared being implicated and wanted a clean exit. I had to decide whether to use his material. Using it could destroy a business and a household. I asked him to give the documents to our lawyer for verification. He did. The documents confirmed financial backing for the cleanup operations the Alvarez family used to shape narratives. When the judge saw this, the scale tipped further. Yet even as the evidence stacked, I felt a strange pity for the family, especially for Mateo, who had been trained to fear independence. I wanted to win without crushing them. I told my lawyer to focus on truth, not revenge. But the Alvarez family would not give up easily. The trial loomed like a mountain. I practiced calm speeches and reviewed evidence constantly. People showed up to support me. Neighbors whose minds had changed. Eliza, Luis, and even a few distant relatives of Mateo who had been shut out. The Alvarez family hired heavy-hitter lawyers. They tried to intimidate witnesses and discredit Carlos. The twist came on the morning the trial started. Mateo's father had a health episode. He collapsed and was rushed to the hospital. News outlets framed it as stress. Mr. Alvarez's side used his illness to paint themselves as victims and to delay proceedings. For a moment, everything paused. I sat in the hospital corridor, feeling conflicted. I didn't want a man's illness to be used as leverage, but I could not ignore the timing. Mateo visited his father, pale with worry. He returned shaking, torn between family duty and truth. The court allowed a short delay, but our momentum slowed. I worried the delay would give the Alvarez camp time to craft new lies. We pressed our lawyers to stay focused. The community waited. I realized that justice would require patience and strength, and I had to hold both even while my heart ached for the complicated man in the hospital. The trial resumed. The courtroom was packed. Mr. Alvarez sat, pale but present. He tried to charm the jury with confessions of paternal worry. But the evidence cut deeper than rhetoric. Carlos testified about reputation payments. The housekeeper repeated her admission. The handwriting analyst explained the forgeries. Then Mateo played the recording in court. His father's voice filled the room. You could hear polite planning, the idea of shaping public truth. Mr. Alvarez's face crumpled. The judge leaned forward. The Alvarez lawyers tried to salvage dignity with legal hair-splitting. But the public record was clear. There had been a pattern of fabrication. The twist the Alvarez team saved for last was a claim that I had accused them to gain money or custody. They suggested I was greedy. I had no desire for cruelty, only for peace. The trial reached its climax when the judge, declared that the fabricated evidence had been used to manipulate Mateo and obstruct fair resolution. He ruled that the restraining and guardianship claims were baseless. The Alvarez family received a public reprimand. The judge also ordered family counseling and oversight. It was a vindication, but not a triumph. The wounds were raw. I stepped out of the courtroom with Mateo at my side, feeling exhausted and oddly light. After the trial, life felt like a river that had changed course. People apologized quietly. Some never returned. The Alvarez family retreated, nursing wounded pride. Mateo and I began the slow work of rebuilding trust. The judge's order forced supervised meetings, which felt awkward but allowed us to talk without manipulative undertones. Mateo was learning to say no without guilt, and I was learning to forgive without forgetting. We set boundaries, financial and emotional, and moved into a small apartment where we could breathe. The twist came when Mr. Alvarez attempted a public PR move, donating to a children's charity and posting photos in the paper. It was an attempt to heal reputation. Some neighbors accepted it. Others saw it as deflection. Meanwhile, private life deepened. Mateo surprised me one rainy afternoon with a small red scarf he had repaired, remembering the one from our early days. He showed me the phone where he had finally moved his messages to his own cloud, away from his parents' reach. He promised to be transparent. I felt a tempered joy. The biggest twist was emotional. I realized I no longer needed to dismantle every piece of the Alvarez presence. I needed to protect our future and offer compassion where possible. We started to plan small trips, simple tests of new patterns. Months passed and routine settled. The community began to speak of healing. The Alvarez family kept a distance but occasionally reached out with guarded, polite messages. Mateo's parents started family counseling reluctantly. The twist came when the housekeeper reached out to me, apologizing. She said she had lived in fear for years and finally wanted to tell the truth. She confessed to regrets, and we spoke quietly over tea. Her apology felt like rain after drought. It didn't erase pain, but it helped. Mateo and I hosted a small dinner for friends who had stood by us. The evening was warm and honest. We shared stories that were real and small, nothing sensational. Mateo spoke about learning to trust his own voice. I spoke about learning courage that wasn't loud. The media interest had faded, and we found peace in small things: a market trip, a quiet movie night, a book read aloud. Yet one final twist arrived when Mr. Alvarez sent a written note, short, acknowledging harm and asking only for privacy. It was not a full apology, but it was something. I wrote back that privacy was fine if it came with honesty. The years ahead would be a test. We had survived a storm and begun to plant seeds. Time to strange healing. I watched Mateo grow steadier, making choices he owned. He applied for a job in a field he loved, not the one his parents had chosen. He laughed more. We signed our names on small leases and bills together, learning shared responsibility on new terms. Neighbors who once whispered now nodded in acknowledgement. The twist in private life was that forgiveness took odd forms. I forgave not to let them back into the same dangerous patterns, but to free myself from poison. I forgave myself to move on. One evening, a small package arrived without a name. Inside was a childhood diary belonging to Mateo, found and returned by a distant cousin who wanted no credit. He had once been afraid those pages would be used against him. Seeing his handwriting from youth felt tender and raw. He read a line aloud about wanting to live honestly. He cried. We held each other, shivering with relief. The final twist, tiny and bright, was this: the thing that had bound us, fear and control, would no longer be the center of our story. We would center choices that made us kinder and braver. We rebuilt our life with careful stitches. Mateo's parents continued therapy. Sometimes they called, tentative and awkward. I answered with boundaries. At community events, we were all present but not entwined. The twist that marked real change was subtle. Mr. Alvarez helped organize a neighborhood fund for elders after a public meeting where he admitted, in careful words, that his need to control had hurt people. It wasn't a full confession, but it was public acknowledgement of harm. The neighborhood responded by slowly welcoming him back into small interactions while watching closely. I wondered if true change could come from such small acts. Mateo and I began volunteering at a local shelter, doing simple work that helped us feel generous instead of retaliatory. The work grounded us. When someone asked me about revenge, I said quietly that my revenge was living well. That line surprised people. It was not cruelty, it was firmness and dignity. The final twist before the end arrived when we realized our story had changed other people. A neighbor, once a believer in outward respect only, began questioning his own family patterns. Our small ripple had become a current. I write this now with sunlight on the table. The divorce papers that once burned in my hands now sit in a folder, a part of a messy but honest story. The Alvarez family learned, painfully, and began small repairs. We did not win by destroying them. We won by showing truth, using evidence and patience, and choosing to live with integrity. Mateo rebuilt his voice, his finances, his choices. He learned to say no and to stand beside me as an equal. The neighborhood changed in small but steady ways. My in-laws said I trapped their son, and for a while their words felt like chains. But our divorce papers humbled them, not through humiliation, but by revealing how control hides in family love. The final twist is this. The real victory was not legal alone. It was in teaching a man to trust himself, and in letting people see that bravery can be quiet. I wake now without that heavy breath of dread. There are still scars. There are still days of doubt, but there is also a steady light. I hold Mateo's hand. We are free, and that freedom was earned with truth, patience, and unyielding care. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and tap the bell to get notified the moment we drop a new story, and don't forget to like the video to help others find it.